Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Normally, when it comes to videos on the channel, you know that I tend to write a script and I tend to give you all my thoughts pretty well digested on a single topic and keep things rather focused. And today we're doing mostly none of that. For starters, there's no script. Secondly, we're going to be covering a much wider series of topics. And thirdly, I'm not doing this alone. I'm joined by Moonvald, who is, of course, amongst other things, responsible for the voice of Savathun on Dynasty. But also, her channel has a phenomenal amount of awesome content that should hopefully be coming soon, and she is actually the subject matter expert on what we were going to be talking about today, which is the general occult vibe of Destiny and what's going on in that kind of side of storytelling narrative and everything that is attached to it topically. So, Moon, thank you so much for jumping in on the video.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm always excited to chat, and, I haven't really gotten the opportunity to discuss this at length with anyone yet in a, what'd you say, podcast format.
Yeah, podcast, we'll call this like a one, I don't know how many more episodes of this would come along. Podcasts are hard to organize because it requires multiple people. Normally I can just sit there and be like, haha, I'm having terrible work hours, it's 3 a.m, let's record a video. But no, requiring things of scheduling is tough. Point being though, before we do start anything else, go ahead and follow Moon over on socials. I'll go ahead and make sure that Martin has those popped up for you on screen right now, and we'll have all those relevant links. But yeah, be sure to follow Moon's channel in particular if you are interested in Destiny lore as it pertains to various occult things. So thank you so much again for joining, and let's really jump in. I think the biggest topic this season realistically is around the way that the tarot of Destiny's Deck of Whispers has come to the forefront, but also it's brought back the kind of occult vibes that are very much drawn in around any topic matter surrounding Eris Morn. I think that that is kind of the general area where we can start to discuss things. And I think the main objective of everything today is to sort of give people a better idea of the context of what we mean when we say tarot and what it might represent in the Destiny context versus what it means in real life and how those two influences mesh together. So if it's okay, Moon, go ahead. Talk to us on the very beginning spiel of this, because I know I've potentially jumped the gun into the first topic if there was a disclaimer
you're okay.
or anything.
Yeah, the disclaimer I generally like to give when speaking about things like this, and what I sort of try to put forward with my own content is that I like to approach these things from an objective perspective by looking at their history and the art surrounding them, in general real world context, right? Anything based on gnosis or personal experiences or personal beliefs, I'm usually pretty reticent to share anyway, because that's a very personal thing. So when we discuss topics like this, it's good to kind of let people know that we want to approach them as objectively as possible, right? Because I saw some comments on your last video where people were kind of struggling with it, kind of, from their own perspectives, whether it be, their own beliefs or their own skepticism. So just know, this isn't me trying to proselytize or anything of that variety. I just have a lot of knowledge to share. And I think it's pretty relevant, like you said, to Destiny in general. So, yeah.
Because, if you are going to go ahead and actually understand some of the stuff that's been put out in the system, understanding the context of what's going on in the first place is, it's critical to it, If I sat there and I looked at a deck of cards and then a deck of tarot cards and I didn't know anything about tarot, it would be very easy to assume that one is the same, it's just lacking 30 cards. And, we're not sitting here trying to, you use the word proselytize in the document we've got up there before, and I think that's perfect for it. We're not trying to do that. This is not about what you do or don't believe. This is about understanding. So,
right.
Yeah.
And even so, a lot of the subjects surrounding this that I will talk about, I don't always necessarily believe or practice. I in a video that I made last year, I talked about the psychologist Carl Jung, and like I don't put stock in a lot of his work, just because of, you know, things that have been disproven and better studied throughout the years, just stuff like that, right?
But regardless, you know, we'll touch on things as they come up because, you know, as we said, it's about context, right?
Right.
And understanding
exactly.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah, let's jump into tarot first. Needless to say, tarot comes bound up with the idea of reading one's fate, symbolism, and what's going on in a person's life, challenges that may approach them. Expand on everything that is going on with tarot, basically, because I think that understanding it is... I've probably butchered the entirety of it just by saying a few basic ideas. Like, there's nuance to be added, so go right ahead.
There's lots of nuance. Yeah, in your video where you shouted me out last week, which thank you, by the way, you mentioned something about there being like little over a dozen ways to read. There are infinite numbers of ways to read tarot. Anything you can think of, basically. Anything you can sort of structure your reading around, you can ask it literally any question. And that's kind of the point of it. You know, a lot of people will also use it in just kind of a personal, reflective context where, you know, say you're having a problem or you're struggling with something, you can pull a couple cards and just give yourself a moment to reflect on that. It doesn't have to be a spiritual thing. But the thing about tarot is that it is a very specific system. It is based on archetypes. And to understand it in its current form, it is best served if you have knowledge of other occult correspondences, such as like elemental relations and just reading symbols in general, and astrological correspondences can come into play as well. But, you know, there are 22 major arcana, and the rest of your cards are what are called court cards, but they represent a very specific journey, essentially. So when we take a look at the current season's tarot deck, it's not actually a tarot deck because it is not structured the same way as the capital T tarot is, right? It is more accurately described, I would say, as an oracle deck, right? That tends to be what we call a deck of cards used for divination that doesn't follow the structure of tarot. Does that make sense?
Yes. So what is it just based on the structure of readings? Is it the number of cards? Is it the fact that the 22 cards in tarot are set, whereas oracle decks can have any number of different meanings? Let's better understand the difference there.
Yeah, so the tarot relies on specific archetypes. It relies on the 22 major arcana and the 4 suits of court cards specifically. Whereas an oracle an oracle deck can be structured however you like. Its symbols can mean any number of things, right? Based on who authored the deck, essentially. But tarot is very specific in the way it delineates things.
Gotcha. So it's much more accurate to describe something like, say, the Deck of Whispers as an oracle deck based on that alone. And oracle decks aren't bound by any set number of cards. As you said, they also don't have those major arcana, which gives the Deck of Whispers that freedom to sort of live in that context of, hey, I've only got 12 cards, and none of them are going to be the major arcana that people might be familiar with, such as, say, the Tower, or, gosh, I'm trying to remember any other. Is the Devil one? I think the Devil's one, right?
Yes, the Devil is a card.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So good to understand and define the difference between all of those. In relation to the Deck of Whispers being an oracle deck, is there anything in particular that tells us about it beyond it being influenced by tarot? Is there maybe something is perhaps the medium a bit too freeform to tell much more about it, or is there some kind of influence that it seems to draw from? Is there anything that stands out in particular?
So the context that we have surrounding the Deck of Whispers is heavily related to the Hive, obviously, and Eris as well, because Eris has been such a focal point for these more, I guess, metaphysical kind of ideas that we see in Destiny. She's always been connected to magic and sorcery, and more recently, divination, which is sort of the purpose that the Deck of Whispers serves, right? Mm-hmm. It tells a story. You have these figures that are present in the history of the Hive, as well as, I'm sure we'll get into it later, but, the last card in the reading that we get this season is Riven, right? And it's called The Wish. And that could point to any number of things, but the Ahamkara kind of being these beings that can change and manipulate reality. To have that as sort of our last card that we look at this season is very interesting to me.
It's very telling too. I feel as though Bungie loves doing the thing of hinting at stuff, and it's probably been one of the more, if this is a hint to any kind of future story content, it's probably been one of the more overt hints that they've given to us, even if the card even if the card itself has just appeared, dropped its lore entry, and not done much more. It's an exciting time to sit there and contemplate that, and even if it's not really given us too much more than that. This is not the first time that anything when it comes to occultism has appeared in Destiny, though, and I say occultism, that's probably the wrong term, but it's, I think, a broad catch-all for all sorts of things that have gone on in Destiny.
I would say esotericism.
Esotericism?
As opposed to occultism.
Okay.
Because esoteric ideas don't have to necessarily have a spiritual context or a metaphysical meaning. They can just for something to be esoteric, it is just hidden knowledge, right? It is things that aren't discernible on the surface always, or it can be something that just isn't commonly known. It doesn't have to be that deep, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah. But yeah, no, this definitely isn't the first time we've seen it in Destiny. It's been there. It's been present since the beginning. Do you remember the project that we worked on when we met?
Oh gosh, that would have been years ago.
Years and years ago. The Music of the Spheres.
Oh my goodness, this has come back into my orbit for a whole bunch of different reasons that I'm not ready to talk about video-wise, but yes, 100%.
So Music of the Spheres was a philosophical concept that kind of gained traction during the Renaissance, but it was popular in the time of Pythagoras, right? Where it suggests that the planets, all of the celestial bodies that we have in the sky, that they correlate to sound and music in the way that they are positioned and the way that they move. And it's a concept that's been related to Destiny for
literally
a long time.
Since it's one of its first reveals, right?
Before its inception, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's funny that was the first thing we ever talked over or met over, and now we're talking about it again.
Indeed. And God, I need to go and continuously look into this. There's a whole bunch of stuff to do with Gaia forms and various characters throughout Destiny's universe, hearing music and a few other bits and pieces here and there, and it's just oh man. Yeah. The idea that planets are alive alone lends a whole new interesting layer to things like Music of the Spheres, based purely on the idea that if you are looking at them as celestial bodies, you can actually add a capital C onto the word celestial there, and as the implication of sitting there and saying that yes, these things are alive and perhaps have some kind of divine nature to them, by the way, for those of you who are lamenting as Titans the nerf in the Crucible to the boots that give you the big slide reflect Antaeus wards. Yeah, this is very much about those. Go and actually read the lore on that. That's awesome stuff. But yeah, no, Music of the Spheres as well has definitely been one of the earliest influences on that. And it's esotericism in Destiny has been there from the very beginning, even baked deep into some of the other lore. But, you know, this isn't the first time that I think it's been front and center in a season either. I mean, take a look at, in our notes here, you've got Season of the Drifter noted down, and in particular, references related to the Nine.
Yeah, so I mentioned divination a little bit, and throughout the years, the story sort of being told to us in bits and pieces. The Nine are really good at this. The Nine, I mean, there's a whole dungeon called Prophecy that tells us what is, about to happen in Beyond Light. So Destiny is no stranger to this sort of symbolism and this sort of storytelling and this tool for narrative delivery, right? If you mentioned tarot and the Nine specifically, years and years and years ago during Season of the Drifter, we had the invitations of the Nine missions, and they were all named after tarot cards. And I truly believe this is just another instance of the Nine trying to show us where we're going and what's about to happen. It's fascinating.
It gets really deep too, because it's not just the fact that the missions were there. You even got down to going back into really old stuff to do with Destiny proper. If I'm not mistaken, back in was it Destiny 1 perhaps? There was the Five of Swords. There was something you could do. I want to say you could buy it from Xur, and then it would allow you to do something to do with your Nightfall. Someone is going to inevitably tell us and correct us in the comments, but I know that this has been an item that you've been able to pick up at a certain point. And even back in the days of Season of the Drifter, when you actually went and did Reckoning, if I'm not mistaken, the final bosses, the kind of Darkblade style knights that you would face in the final arena, they were styled after, or rather they were named after similarly named cards. I think that one of them was called the Three of Swords or something along those lines, which, it's only hinting more heavily at this idea that the Nine do have, I struggle with a word. I think that clairvoyance is way too hard on that particular front of things, but they have an ability to sort of perceive beyond various bits and pieces that haven't happened in the universe yet. Maybe as a fact of the nature of the Nine themselves, the idea that the
experiencing things in a non-linear way in relation to time. Too, right?
Non-linear, but also the fact that the Nine, as strange as everything seems, are kind of everywhere. If they are, as the lore seems to imply, some kind of sentient dark matter, then they have been given form by everything else in the universe, which means astounding us, their knowledge is actually very intimate of everything around them because it's what makes them, the absence of civilizations thanks to a figure such as the Witness or Oryx or Zivur Arath or Savathun is going to be something that's known to them purely out of the fact that they would have felt that absence. Now, granted, we don't know the actual extent of the Nine themselves. It's something that I don't think is explicitly stated, but the very concept and the fact that they are named as something like sentient dark matter is really incredible when you think about what that implies for the amount of knowledge they can gather. And it's so cool that they then present this in this kind of tarot-like in the context of tarot itself, or in the context of anything to do with divination, because it's this implication of sitting there and saying, we can see the pieces moving. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can see all the pieces on the board, right?
Right, because they're not kind of confined to the same restraints that normal corporeal people are. So it's an interesting way to have them interact, I think, with the Guardian and with the story at large.
You have a very interesting note about the language of books bird here. Also, I presume that's also tied in with her respects, because again, it's birds' entrails, but should we pivot on to that sort of thing?
So the language of birds. Yeah, the language of birds is a concept that I have been... I'm going to say the word concept a lot because,
That means what it is, right? Yeah.
It's what it is. Whether you believe it or not, it is an idea. But the language of birds, or the green language, is seen as sort of this... it's such a lofty subject, and it's one that I've been trying to chew on for many, many, many years. But I have a book here that I'm referencing that talks about it in terms of divination, and it's sort of the clockwork of the way the universe moves and the way things unfold. It's such a how do I want to put this? Expansive thing that it's hard to narrow down. The language of nature is also a way people will describe it. How things grow and die, and the cycle of life and death. Very, very, very lofty things to try and condense and speak on. But you mentioned in your last video the seasonal title, Haruspex, right? Mm-hmm. Haruspex was the person who would perform this kind of divination in ancient Rome. They were, let's see, the Oxford, definition of them. Dictionary definition is a religious official who interpreted omens by inspecting the entrails of sacrificial animals. So
predominantly, this is where that, the side thing of hey, what does the spots on the bird's liver imply?
Right.
What does that mean for the fate
Right.
of the battle? That kind of thing, right?
Yes, exactly. The actual divinatory method is haruspicy. I think that's how you say it.
Haruspices?
Haruspices.
That's just fun to say, isn't it? Haruspices.
Yeah, I'm not. In another thing too, when you look at sort of the way we view occult things in our current time, a lot of it comes from ancient Greek and ancient Roman beliefs and religions and that sort of thing. So if ever you want to start somewhere, that is where I would recommend learning first. We get, that's where we get the word demon from the Greek word daemon, which, is essentially more of a spirit than it was an infernal creature. But yeah, no, Haruspex in and of itself was a person who would use this particular method of divination. So again, divining is a huge theme that they're playing with, and that they have been for a long time, the writers.
And even if you go into stuff that's a lot less immediately overt in terms of Destiny's references to those kind of ancient cultures, be it the name of a character like Osiris, or be it the named combatants that you face, such as, say, a Minotaur or a Harpy, which are creatures from Greek mythology, of course, you get the notion that even beyond that, there are vague concepts you could call upon, which in themselves might actually call back to real world, I'll call it esotericism that has occurred. I mean, in particular, I'm starting to sit there and think, have you ever, you may have heard of the oracles of Delphi, right? Mm-hmm. Delphi, as it would be in the US. But yeah, the oracles of Delphi have this really unique sort of manner of being approached, right? You would go towards the temple at Delphi, you would make your offering, and the answer would be sung upwards to you, or would be shouted upwards to you, and it was never completely clear what the answer was. And this idea of an answer coming from somewhere deep below and being not something that you actually see and perceive, but being something that's predominantly based on sound, suddenly it's very easy to relay the connections there and sit there and think, oh goodness, have they been hinting at something like this with the Vault of Glass? The oracles predominantly communicate through sound, right?
Right. You mentioned sound too, that's always been a thing in Destiny. ever, like you said, since Vault of Glass, since Music of the Spheres, the way resonance pertains to, again, corporeal existence, right? And sort of the, I hate using the word metaphysical because it feels so woo-woo.
It feels very up high in the sky, but it's actually appropriate to this term, right? You know.
Yeah. Well, the term itself, you know, you can relate it to the way Destiny uses the word paracausal.
Right.
They're very similar, if not pretty much one-to-one, right?
I mean, if you want an actual, you know, hoo-ha word, paracausal is one. It's literally made up. So, 100%. Like, you know,
right.
we can apply it.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of significance about the Vault of Glass that even I don't know. And I will say this, like, I've heard tell of things. I've never done an investigation about it myself, but there's a lot of stuff going on, and there has been for a very, very, very long time.
Suffice to say, look into any aspect of Destiny somewhere, and those influences just creep in, and it's not even... I mean, some of them, again, are very overt, and some of them are very tacit. You just have subtlety built into some of this, and for others, it's screaming at you in the face. And, you know, discerning the really nuanced versions of it all only, I think, happens when you start to take the stuff that's really quietly whispered about and the stuff that's absolutely screaming at you in the face, and you start to sit there and talk about, like, okay, well, how does all of this fit together, you know? Which is, I think, part of the reason why I love this particular topic. It's something where you get a better understanding from other people's perspectives, because literally esoteric knowledge, and I use that in the context of, yes, actually knowledge that not a lot of people will know
in
about.
a mundane sense, right?
Right? It's actually key to figuring out some of these mysteries, you know, which is what's so cool about this. But
it's again, it's hard. It's another thing that's very hard to whittle down into just specific instances, because it has happened so frequently, and it has been occurring throughout the entire lifespan of this franchise. You know, you mentioned sound, and that's just, again, that's another thing I want to talk about a little bit more, because bringing it up, you see instances of it all over the place. You know, the Hive have their death singers. We have, you mentioned, you know, characters being able to hear resonance when, what was it?
Brother Vance, for example, who hears the resonance coming from the spire, literally the lighthouse in the Caloris spires, whenever a guardian dies. And it is different whenever there is an actual final guardian death, as in one where the light has truly been extinguished and it is a true death. No more resurrections are coming. Right.
And the oracles in the vault are, as you mentioned, and in the fact that supposedly, I can't say for sure, and I don't think any of us can, but if we get our last darkness power here, it's going to be probably called resonance.
Right. Based on what Rulk and the Witness use, literally the power of resonance. You know?
And we hear, you know, tones in the macrocosm encounter in the Root of Nightmares when we're doing the planet thing.
I may have completely missed this. Expand on that, because I've actually never heard of this.
So the audio cues that happen.
Totally a pun there. So sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Heard of this. So sorry. Go ahead.
Oh my god. No, yeah. No, the audio cues that happen when you align the planets. And I believe, you know, I haven't actually run the Root of Nightmares raid enough to know. I'd like to spend more time in there, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anybody, that people mentioned being able to hear the planets in some capacity when they were standing on them. But sound is an important part of that encounter, I guess, is the long and short of it, right? So I think that's...
even goes... Yeah, like even down to the point where there is a clear noise whenever they're being rotated, whenever you're actually in the process of picking them up. And then when you do actually do all of this correctly, and it's made clear that the sequence is incomplete, you will actually get the sound of the planets physically rejecting each other or bouncing off of each other, little bits and pieces, but it sounds
and in
really
that
strange,
you're trying to create a harmony with what you're doing in this encounter, with the way the planets are aligning. The goal is to put the correct thing in the correct place, to create a harmonious resonance, as opposed to the cacophony that happens when you move the wrong planet to the wrong position and everything detonates, essentially.
Death to literal planetary destruction is a raid death thing that I didn't expect to see at any point, but then again, end of Destiny 1, they were literally sitting there and saying, oh, if you don't complete the Death Zamboni encounter, you just get nuked. So, I mean, that's fun. Enjoy.
Get wrecked, as they say.
Indeed. Honestly, though, that's such a cool idea, especially because, again, linking back in with the music of the spheres and the idea that each of these planets has its own tone, there is so much that you can potentially draw from that. We've also got to note that some of the planets that we see there, I say planets, really planetoids, some of them are important narratively speaking, because you get places like Io where there has been a significant amount of the Traveler's own sort of influence, and it was the last place that the light really touched before the collapse occurred. And so even based purely on that, there are so many times where we'll be walking across Io prior to it being sunset, and we'll have things like missions where we can specifically hear voices, or there is a specific disturbance of light. This is the place where we got our second light subclasses, if that makes sense. So things like, say, Bonkhammer for Titans, or Chaos Reach for Stormcallers, these brand new powers that were gifted to us when the Traveler dreamed of these places. And a lot of it is bound up in the ability to have these sort of subtle communications in that sense. And being linked in as a planetary system like that, I think I always love coming back to Io for these same reasons, having it tied in as well with sound. It's, I don't know. It's a fascinating little set of links. It brings me back to another thing too. Witter on here, but it's one of my favorite quotes. Lumina, at a certain point in its lore tab and its description, has something along the lines of the Traveler could hear our roar being stated in there. And I've always sat there and thought that that's a really curious line, because sitting there and understanding that, there is this kind of, I think telepathic is the wrong word, but there's this resonance from us as a species that is being projected out across the cosmos. It's a very intriguing idea to sit there and wonder, how does the Traveler choose all of these things? Does it listen for the music of the spheres? Does it listen for a specific civilization that might be worthy of carrying its gift? What's the context there, right? And the ideas presented through all of the esotericism surrounding Io, surrounding music of the spheres, even surrounding humanity in its own nature as it would appear in the Golden Age. That's all stuff I think that points towards those ideas more clearly. Yeah. A total load of tangents, but I think that's kind of the fun thing about all of this, because, a lot of this stuff feels very interconnected, and it's great to be able to sit there and just push the boat out, speculate a little bit, and bring in some interesting things that might
pinning
sound
our red
similar.
Strings together.
Yeah, exactly.
On the whiteboard. Yeah,
100%.
Which is another thing that was funny about Witch Queen.
Oh yeah,
we have a literal thing, right? It's hilarious.
I'm gonna get Martin to pull up the graphic real quick of the board that I ask him to deploy whenever I start to talk about crazy theory stuff. But yeah, no. It's exciting just sitting there and looking and seeing how many of these different references can really pull together. Yeah. It's so strange that you can sit there and say something along the lines of sound in Destiny, how is it all related? And then if you know enough and you go deep enough, you can actually pull through a bunch of these different intriguing theories.
Well, you can even zoom out on that a little bit more, because if you want to talk about sound itself as it relates to sort of this narrative around paracausality and such, you can kind of connect it to, how would I put this, the metaphysical study of matter and the way it interacts with the metaphysical, the unseen aspects of the universe, the cosmos. It's really important in the context, I think, of the light and the darkness, especially because they each have their own aspects that reflect each other. The darkness being all about sort of mental faculty and cognition and such, right? And the light relating a lot more to the
surrounding physical world.
The physical world, exactly, right? So when you have things like sound and resonance relating to the darkness, and like matter, physical matter relating to the light, you can see it in all throughout history. In terms of, and I mentioned Hermetic philosophy a lot, which is a thing that has changed face for eons and thousands of years, but in sort of in a contemporary sense, this is another really big subject, but in a more contemporary sense, it relates to connecting the spiritual and the physical together, and it looks at a balance, right? Which is, so destiny is all about the right. relationship between the light and the darkness, and we see it represented in. So
sorry, go ahead. My apologies.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, Hermetic sciences, we see it represented in alchemy, which is sort of something we've had a taste of before, in Destiny, per like Witch Queen. I know there were a few weapons and stuff that had alchemical symbols on them, and people were
and the armor sets and everything too.
But
I was actually going to ask, but I think you've actually answered that question of, well, what exactly is Hermeticism and Hermetic philosophy? But I think you actually touched on it right there. So
that's another thing too. It's hard to explain. It is another thing that I've been learning about for my entire life, and I've been trying to deconstruct for my entire life too, because I grew up around Freemasonry actually, and it's I know that sounds insane. If you want to know why I am the way that I am, but it's been really distorted and kind of obscured and quite frankly butchered by a lot of New Age sort of thought, which is
modern aspects of the world will take something and then popularize it and twist it into something simplified and change the meaning to make it
a lot of people around the turn of in the late 1800s, early 1900s, sort of being like, I'm going to be capital S spiritual. I'm going to go to India, study yoga, and come back and be a yogi, and it's like completely having the wrong idea about all of these religions and beliefs that they sort of made a collage for themselves, for their own thing from. But I don't know if that even makes any sense. It's just a lot of
right?
copying and pasting, essentially, right? From different traditions that you don't fully understand. That's has had a lot of influence on the way we see Hermeticism today.
And a lot of it as well, I imagine, is how you get that, those broad explorations of things, but they don't actually go into any kind of depth, right? Right,
exactly. So and a lot of the time it just completely lost. Yeah, exactly. Misconstrued, misrepresented, that sort of thing. So that's another level of sort of obfuscation that makes it difficult to discuss, essentially. But I do believe that there is a lot of that present in Destiny, that sort of Western occultism, right? If you want to broaden the topic a little bit more, especially with, we mentioned Vance and Osiris a little bit earlier. Osiris is probably one of the most important figures we can look at from that perspective. He himself has designed who he is as a person. The planet that we associate him with, Mercury, all of that ties into sort of this idea of this scholarly sage that we can relate back to the very beginning of hermeticism, in this figure called Hermes Trismegistus, or the Hermes thrice great. Hermes thrice great. Blah.
That's a tongue twister.
It is a tongue twister.
Trismegistus?
Trismegistus. Hermes Trismegistus.
Oh my god. I got it right. I got it vaguely correct. Okay, cool.
But like, if you look him up on Google, maybe Martin could put a picture up here. It's like the resemblance is there. Essentially, the idea was that he was sort of a fictional figure representing the coalition of spiritual beliefs between like Greek and Egyptian and a lot of Abrahamic influence, so like Jewish influence in Islam, and this I hesitate to say mythical sage, but he represents the congregation of a bunch of philosophical and spiritual ideas. And Hermes is Mercury, right? And the fact that Osiris is connected to that planet itself has always been kind of funny to me. Yeah, there's a lot there to talk about, but the way I see it is, Osiris is our archetypal sage, our resident old man space wizard sort of vibe.
And even down to even down to characters like those in the Assyrian cult. Every single one of them, their objective is, some would boil it down to worship, but I think it's more accurate to say that it is actually study. Because, the reason why they even have any kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? The reason they even worship Osiris is realistically that they all read his findings that he published in The Lost City, which eventually would lead to his kind of self-imposed exile, although, back in the day, Speaker would have said otherwise. But the point is that, they're all here predominantly because they have studied and they have seen the kind of potential futures that Osiris outlined and the risks of the Vex and the things that were required. And, there was a lot of exaggeration in the lore of that being a moment where people called those, his notes prophecy and whatnot, but it's realistically the fact that they're not necessarily there to worship, they are there to learn. So the idea of it being related to scholars and messengers of potential futures, it all makes a lot of sense when you think about the actual function even of Mercury itself, and the infinite forest that lies underneath its growth. The entirety of that thing is a world-sized prediction engine that the Vex are using to figure out the future. So yeah, it makes perfect degree of sense, even down to the idea of someone being a messenger for those various different ideas that have come forward about what the future might be. I mean, at the end of his story in the Season of Arrivals, Brother Vance retreats into the infinite forest, and the happenings there in that final lore entry are really weird, and I'll be completely honest, I have trouble imagining what the heck is going on with that. But I think that I think the big thing to take away from it all is that coherently, if you're looking for meaning beneath all of it, a lot of it actually does relate back into these core philosophies and these core pillars, right?
Yeah. Okay, and if you want to also look at the general occult correspondences that relate to the planet Mercury itself, like you just mentioned, the messenger, and you can look at other planets in Destiny as well, in a couple of other places. It's not always one-to-one, but there have been a couple of other instances of astrological symbolism being present, and we actually saw a lot of that with, in my opinion, it seems pertinent to Lightfall, and everything that's happening on Neptune, especially because Neptune, as a planet in astrology, in modern astrology at least, represents like collective consciousness. It represents the barrier between the material and the spiritual worlds. Like I have a book here that I'm going to reference, the Rulership book by Rex E. Bills. And, it's basically a dictionary of correspondences in astrology. And I can look up Neptune. And words related to Neptune are things like veil, which we have the veil, the capital V veil on Neptune. And things such as dreams, the sort of mental realm of experience that human beings can have, right?
Which makes perfect sense when you're trying to tie all of the ideas of all this together. Because, everything that you've just mentioned, even down to the point of, the veil between what is and what isn't, all ties in perfectly with everything that's going on Neomuna, even down to the individual citizens that are locked away in cryogenic suspension inside the Cloud Ark, where the physical world very much does bleed into this not-so-physical realm, where everything is digital, and you are experiencing something that is kind of ascending into consciousness. And of course, consciousness is at the heart of the darkness itself, and that's kind of the key thing to do with Strand and the Veil. It's fascinating to even hear all of that, because you sit there and you wonder what's going on with everything to do with all of these planets, and are there more connections? Because I'm sure there are plenty of other planetoids that have something similar going on with them. It's just a case of figuring out what's what. I mean, Oh, go on, yeah.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I could even further this with Neptune being a thing. The sign that corresponds to Neptune is Pisces, and Pisces is the fish. And it seems very peculiar to me that we have the way the puka are described and like kind of what their purpose is, in terms of them being able to, correct me if I'm wrong, but interact with human emotions, right?
Yes, that's 100%. They're kind of, gosh, I'm trying to remember exactly what the lore from the collector's edition of Lightfall is, but they are immediately highly empathetic creatures, if that makes sense.
Yes, and Pisces as a sign relates very heavily to the idea of empathy, of emotion. In astrology, you have 12 houses on a radial wheel. It's like pieces of a pie, essentially. There's 12 of them, and they all relate to different areas of life, essentially, as it's experienced by humanity. And Pisces rules over the last house, the 12th house, the house of things unseen and in places where things are felt rather than physically perceived. The puka being correlating to Pisces, I think, is pretty likely. It seems it might not be, right, is the other thing, because a lot of this is speculation. I also want to hammer that home, but it seems a lot of it connects in a way that it's like
how many times have we didn't know they were called puka for the longest time. We've called them fish since we first saw them, right? Which is what's so hilarious about all this. But expanding on the lore of it again, you sit there and you take a look at something like the astrological significance around certain bodies and the way that that's represented, and it's like, yeah, this feels like it is an influence for the stuff that's been going on in Destiny storytelling. It's just heavily expanded on, and the ideas here are really neatly intertwined with the things that we find there. And when you sit there and you think of Neptune, you think of Neomuna and this cyberpunk-esque future utopian city that's filled with gleaming lights and glass and tall buildings and some kind of perfect human future. But these themes are actually underpinning the most important parts of its lore, which is what's so fascinating.
Exactly. And I talked about the language of the birds earlier. I'd like to bring that up again, because Strand is I've been kind of like, again, this is not something that I can directly correlate or prove or do anything other than speculate with, but when Nimbus describes the river of life, that is, I think, a perspective that is analogous to the language of the birds. The force that flows through nature, flows through all living things, right? And again, the fact that we get Strand, we get this incorporeal thing that we get to connect to on Neptune, on Neomuna. Interesting, very interesting to me.
And worth noting as well, like the fact that there's a bunch of different names for that, and the fact that a lot of it revolves around interpretation. Osiris's actual research notes bring that up, and it mentions some notions of the river that Nimbus describes being a river of souls. It mentions some of it being a river of dreams, some of it being a river of life, some of it being other names. But the idea
the
is
consciousness of the universe, right?
Yeah, and
is the huge thing with it.
Yeah, and it comes to everybody in their dreams, basically. They have no idea where this thing came from, but they all agree that it's absolutely a children's story that they've all been told. They just have no clue where the origin of this thing was. So it's kind of it's if it wasn't for the influence of the veil and the presence of it clearly having some influence, it would be some kind of spontaneous myth that just suddenly appeared, right?
Right, exactly. Again, Pepe Sylvia just pitting things to the board. It's a lot to talk about.
This is why I love it, though, because this is the field that comes up whenever you have a season like Season of the Witch or Season of the Haunted, where things will just appear and it's like, they're bringing all of that influence front and center now. But there's also the stuff that's clearly hiding beneath the carpet that you're just waiting to unveil and be like, aha, behold, it was there all along. You guys just didn't realize it. That's, I think, what's the most exciting about it, too.
Yeah. And again, to your audience, I do apologize if I sound at all disjointed or rambly when talking about these things, because it's such a broad thing to be discussing. But that's the fun of it, right? Like you said, is just sitting here and connecting the dots and speculating. But yeah.
We touched on Season of the Haunted. We could jump there real quick.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We could definitely talk about Season of the Haunted. Did you get a chance to, by any capacity, skim through the singular video I currently have on my YouTube channel? How
would you best introduce the topic as it pertains to Season of the Haunted, I guess, and everything?
Well, I mean, again,
that's the fun thing we can jump in with.
Yeah, so talking about Season of the Haunted, it's another season that revolves around Eris, largely. And Eris has been kind of our go-to for interacting with paracausal things. We see her performing a ritual to help relieve Zavala and Keitel and Crow of the trauma they've experienced in their past. And this is kind of when I bring up, the idea of the shadow in psychology as described by Carl Jung, who, again, don't agree with all of his ideas, much like Freud, kind of iffy and dubious, but it still presents this notion of the shadow, which is sort of the hidden aspect of yourself that needs to be illuminated, to be understood, and to be integrated into the entirety of your person, in your being, so it doesn't subconsciously affect you and kind of negatively impact your function as a human being, if that makes any sense at all. But we see it when we go through the Severance missions and the characters, confront their past and confront their trauma and illuminate the figures that they're interacting with physically. Like, they will shine a literal light upon them and sort of come to an understanding, I guess, about what has happened to them. That's a huge thing I talked about in that video in particular.
Similarly, I think another place, and I don't want to touch on this too much because this is very much a topic that I know you want to talk about later on. I think some of the most fascinating things that we find as far as it pertains to anything to do with esotericism can really be found in Witch Queen, but predominantly I think there is a huge section that I think it would be fantastic to just touch on really quickly with regards to the pyramid and Valve the Disciple and whatnot. Now, I should preface this by saying this is a topic that I am nowhere close to anywhere near as knowledgeable on as Moon, but also it is worth noting that this is you want to make a video on this as is, and there's so much to touch on here. But like, there is a lot. In particular, though, there's all sorts of things that happen both within and without the pyramid, and the art that is represented there sort of tells like a story, doesn't it? At least from your perspective that you've been going through,
right.
Correct?
Right, for sure. The way again, this is something that I've been gnawing on since Witch Queen was released, and since we had gained access to particularly the Sunken Pyramid and all of the stuff that Rolk has going on. But, in the first encounter in the raid, in that room, I believe there is a lot of significant symbolism and a lot of, again, this sense of prophecy and things being foretold. As somebody who has studied semiotics and in the way to read signs and symbols, right? I took a look at this room and said, okay, like, is there anything to this? Are we getting any kind of messages from the way the symbols are, the way they're laid out, the way the structures, like the physical structure of the room is? And I think there's something to it. Again, it's not something I can necessarily say for certain or prove because it's all based on speculation. It's just something I want to hammer home, but there is, in my opinion, something going on there. And I would love to talk about it more. I've had half of a script written for years about it. It's just been a thing that has been a lot to condense down in a way that is digestible for people, right? Doesn't make me sound completely insane when I'm talking about it. But yeah, the Sunken Pyramid and Rolk's whole deal is very significant to me.
I mean,
in my opinion.
it even has, I mean, there's even stuff that's so overt about it where it goes on to actually have a physical prophecy wall, right? The prophecy of which has always been incomplete, but on repeat runs through, you can start to decipher it, at which point, it ends with that ominous thing of the witness will kill, and then there's nothing. The final note of whatever it is not there. So it's just, it's left us consistently in that place where we've had messaging that's come forth from the pyramid, and everything about its architecture, its design, the art that you can see in the reliefs and on the walls, and the different displays that are all around. There are so many different bits and pieces to it that are inspired and would take ages to come through. I do want to, it's not at all the complete picture of things, but I think it's worth bringing up because people have asked me about this over and over and over and over again. But you are the only person, I think, who's ever given me an answer on this, or even something vaguely close to a theory. Why horses? Because even past the acquisition encounter, we have horses. And
horses. We love horses. So animal symbolism is just another thing, another area of occult or esoteric study. The animals represent various ideas in every single human culture across the planet, essentially. You have crabs often representing the moon because of the way they move and their connection to the ocean and the tides. You have snakes are a huge thing. So the question was, why horses? Yes?
Yes.
In essence, horses represent transcendence. They represent life and death. They can represent war and peace. They, represent the elements of water and fire at the same time. So the fact that we get them in the contexts that we get them in Destiny is pretty significant to me, because you have, again, in the pyramid, in the acquisition room, there's the weird horse statues after you exit that room, right? And long story short, that room represents the journey to wield both light and dark, right? And at the end of it, we have this symbol of the horse, but we also see it with Star Horse, which
in the 9, yeah,
because I mean, the 9 are inherently transcendental beings. They operate outside of the normal confines of existence that we are constrained to. So horses being a symbol of transcendence as beings is something that I think is at play here, essentially.
Even more so than just that, I feel as though in both instances, it's kind of a hint as to what's going on, because you see the horses within Rulk's architecture, but you also see it in a lot of the kind of like, I hate to use the word, but the sort of twisted and tortured statues that you get other places through the raid. You see them as what look like human figures, but some of them are also clearly equine. Some of them are clearly horses. Yeah. And I think that in itself speaks a little bit more to the witness's motivations as well. It's this idea of, well, you are seeing these beings transcend slightly, but it's transcending into this thing that the witness has created. It's watching all of the chaos of it being sloughed away and redefined. And in a certain sense, it's directly screaming the kind of evil that the witness is. It's cutting away at these beings that are quite clearly existing within their own foundations, but these are foundations that the witness fundamentally disagrees with based on the final shape. And it's really about this idea of, tearing it down in the process of this transcendence, which, if it's to link it back in there, that's what it really speaks to on the front of all that. I also have to say, again, transcendence is such a cool idea when it comes to it, because, again, you brought up the 9, and we discussed earlier what the 9 are, but transcendence is the perfect means of describing what it would be like to interact with them in any instance, because they are far beyond everything that we experience. They are far beyond our own concept of consciousness, let alone anything in between. So it's possibly the best explanation for why horses, which, by the way, thank you, because you've given a coherent answer to a question that I've gotten for about 6 or 7 years, and that in itself, I think, is something which will... I'm just really glad to have something to something to
and again, I can't.
Now.
It's just another thing I can't say for sure, right? But by like my best estimations of everything, it seems likely. But yeah, even in terms of the witness and horses being directly connected, horses also represent war and conquest, and they're representative of the planet Mars, in Mars being the literal god of war. It makes sense.
Absolutely.
From my perspective. There's a lot of animal symbolism happening in Destiny. Again, I mentioned snakes a little bit ago. I don't know if Martin kept that cut in, but when you think of a snake and you think of Destiny, I think it's safe to say that most people would think of the Drifter. And that's of particular interest to me because a lot of people will see the serpent or the snake in occult ideology as the bringer of knowledge, right? Sort of the telling of the story of the Garden of Eden, where, Satan or whatever appeared in the form of a snake and gave Eve, again, knowledge, essentially. But it's relevant to the Drifter in particular because Drifter was sort of the harbinger of the darkness. He was the first person we had in game who was like, hey, so there's this thing that we can do, and there's this way we can interact with the darkness.
Literally, the big fuss that was kicked up in Season of the Drifter, and honestly by the community that was really surrounding some of the lore when Drifter first entered the game, was the fact that the Drifter was the first character we'd ever had who literally, as you'd implied, said, embrace the dark, you know? And it's things like, it feels good to be a bad guy, doesn't it? And this became the entire subplot of the Season of the Drifter, while you had Arnor Mahal in the background as she was working to sort of figure out what was going on with the Drifter and to see what made him tick, and to sort of catch him in this process of like, he is really a corruptive force and I'm going to see if I can put a stop to him. You know, that entire side to it is all based on the idea that he brings this knowledge with him. And
right. And the darkness, again, being very literally correlated to knowledge itself, just knowledge as a
concept,
noun, right? And it being related to the mental, like, consciousness, right? So yeah, that's always been of particular interest to me. We love the Drifter, of course.
Indeed.
But
also worth noting that, like, again, when it comes down to it, the Drifter is one of the coolest characters when it comes to a lot of these references, because I feel as though he is that perfect bridge of the gap. He is very much tied up in a lot of this stuff, even down to the various communications that you have between him and Eris and Orin in the, I say Orin, I guess we can say the emissary, realistically, because it's a strange mix between the two. There's a point at which I think Orin's voice does actually call forth, but the point is, he reacts, I think, in the way that a lot of us would in this context, of just sitting there and being like, what the heck is going on here? I really don't understand half this stuff. I can pull together the pieces. And then you have someone who actually understands it all in the form of the emissary coming along and explaining it. And then you have someone who also very much understands the context and is seeing it with a much more informed and fresher pair of eyes in the form of Eris. Sitting there and watching that interaction, I think, is fantastic, because the Drifter makes it open, if that makes sense. You know, like he makes the entire set of principles approachable. And in that sense, you know, it goes back to his entire point of if he is associated with the snake and the snake is the bearer of knowledge, he is literally the one making it all accessible for us by sitting there and being like, how the heck does this work? And then, you know, essentially forcing the emissary to sort of give more context or to explain, sometimes at his own expense. Because I know there's a point at which the emissary literally teleports him into two different kind of alternate, I think dimensions is the wrong word, but alternate experiences. One being a situation where there is far too much light, and another being one where there is far too much darkness, and where there is no balance between the two. And it's just, yeah, moments like that give this really fascinating context, and again, show him as the bearer of that literal knowledge. Just awesome to point out.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned balance again, which is essentially in terms of the Guardian, in terms of the player going through all of this, and from our perspective, I really get a feeling that our personal transcendence is in us learning to wield both the darkness and the light in tandem, and that is, you know, that is our final shape. Final shape being a more broad concept than just what the witness has planned, but like the next step in the evolution of the Guardian or humanity, or however you really want to look at it right now, at the precipice of like a cosmic apocalypse, right? Also going to add, I know we talked about this a lot about a week ago, but the darkness representing suffering, essentially. There's also this idea that you cannot know happiness or joy or life without death and suffering being present as well. Like, one cannot exist without the other. We need contrast to be able to be sentient and be physical entities that move and exist within the confines of the universe, essentially. Yeah. So I think that's pretty relevant here as well. Just sort of discovering what it means to handle the darkness, and understanding that it's necessary, right?
Mm-hmm. And not even just as a thing of, we must use it in order to, succeed against the wizard. No, necessary in the most literal of the uses of the word, as in, it is not a negotiable part of something. It is a part of the universe because it is.
Yep. Simply because it's just the machinations of the universe. I'm going to send you an image, because this is another thing I kind of wanted to talk about that interested me. So this kind of, I kind of got a little bit fixated on this image.
For context, this is either the Explicator of Planets, or this is the original concept art behind Callus. Which one is it?
I think this is the former. So the thing about this that kind of just made me go, is that resonance and terraformation, obviously the darkness and the light, the traveler, and whatever else we have going on here, being represented by a crescent that looks like the moon, and being in the resonance being represented by the sun. Looking at this from an astrological perspective, in terms of the symbolism between the sun and the moon, the sun represents like a singular sovereign entity. Throughout history, it's been used to represent monarchs and things like that. But it's like the one, a single thing, right? Mm-hmm. And the moon often represents, quote unquote, the people, like more than like a group, a community, that sort of thing. So the fact that we have kind of this visual going on here gave me pause, I guess I should say. So the many and then the one, right? And that's in sort of how the light and the darkness operate. You see it in the word terraformation, where the traveler comes to a society and essentially, how would you put this? It facilitates life in general, right? Like the growth of life, the civilization itself, it provides for. Whereas the darkness, as we see with the way it interacts with Clovis, the way it interacts with the disciples, and the witness especially too, wields it to be,
kind of a singular column, right?
Yes.
And a single opinion. I think it's also neat because it really well represents the ideas of the final shape. For it to occur, both light and dark are required, but also it is literally the many being subject to the will of the one, and their fates being subjected. It is the synthesis of both, and it is the reforging of both as well.
Right. You put it way better than I was able to. Thank you so much. But yes, essentially, that is what I am trying to say. This is why it takes me so long to write scripts, because I just brain vomit. But yeah, so that's what I found really interesting about this image. And again, this is from, I think, Tobias Kwan was the artist behind this. Yes. Don't know if it was intentional, but definitely feels like it. And again, this is another concept that you can kind of see within the Sunken Pyramid as well, and the way the statues are in certain places. And I'll get into that when I make that video, but interesting.
Absolutely. I think the only last thing I want to touch on, this is not on our notes or anything on the list, and so this could just be very much a bunch of unstructured thoughts or a very quick sentence. If you want,
that's what it has been this whole time. So it's fine. It's fine with me.
Yeah, we've got the final shape coming up and everything. Do you see anything, particularly, I'd say, in the architecture of the world within the Traveler, that points to any kind of concept that maybe gives us a bit more insight about it? Because needless to say, this is a landscape that has been formed partly on the basis of what we Guardians have experienced, and also partly on the corruption of the Witness. But is there anything in particular that stood out to you in, say, the trailers or the environment art that you've seen thus far for Final Shape that, stuck out to you and you said, I think that might be based on something.
Let me see here. I'm going to go look at everything again.
There are a few images that stick out for me, and one of them is literally just, hi, there's this cavernous space that has a massive, giant, dragon-looking skull attached to it.
So do we think that's a Hamkara?
I mean, maybe.
Is that
because
kind of the vibe we're getting here?
Who knows, right? Because that's the entire basis of anything that could even vaguely look like that. There's nothing else that we know of, I think, that fits that description, even if that's not typically what, say, Riven's skull looked like. It's convenient because the Ahamkara are shapeshifters, but we also get so many other surreal images. I mean, in that same image, I'll link all of these to you, Martin, so you can show it off to people. There are faces screaming within the wall, and then you look at the other images from throughout the trailer and the reveal, and you have things like tunnels that look like rib cages, except they're made of arms and hands, and it's surreal and it's genuinely horrifying. And it makes me sit there, and if ever there are images that really stand out for me, it's definitely those. But
Right.
Understanding if there are influences is a key thing, I think, that really helps for context.
I think the only thing I can give it here in terms of an interpretation is, so we touched on it earlier, is the will of the many being bent to the will of
Singular.
the singular. Yeah. So, you have all of these living organic figures being twisted into something, the of the witness's design, of the final shape, the titular final shape.
Which in itself is literally subjugation, which fills us in with, the new kind of enemies that we had based on the principles that Rourke put forth and based on Rourke himself. A lot of it, I think, makes sense. It's this application to the singular, unchanging and undying will of the witness.
Yep. Yeah, that's how I would look at it without any extra knowledge of what's happening here. It's very scary. It's very, very potent imagery for sure, which I really appreciate when Destiny kind of steps up and does like a body horror thing. It's always fun.
This honestly, it goes way further. And normally I'd sit there and I would not expect any of this from Destiny, but this last season has very much changed some of that. And you know what? I'm all for it. Bungie, give me more, please.
Yes.
Very much down. But
the last time I really found something as horrific as like what I'm looking at right now is like Rise of Iron with the weird.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. Siva Iron Lords. Oh that.
Yep.
Ugh. That's an image that's really hard to get out of my head.
Yeah. But the fact that they're kind of bringing back that sort of vibe is exciting. I like it. Please, 100%. More cosmic horror. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, more terrifying things from beyond the stars. Very much a fan of that.
Yes.
I think we will mostly cut the conversation there. Thank you so much, Moon, for jumping on. Real quick, before we end this, let's remind everyone again where you can find more of your content.
I'm just Moonvald everywhere. Hopefully, my life has been a little bit of a mess this past year, so I haven't really had the time to dedicate to making sort of longer form YouTube content. But this discussion has definitely sparked my interest in doing it again. So hopefully, I will be able to tackle that soon. Like we mentioned, I'd love to kick off by finishing my dissertation about the Sunken Pyramid and everything I believe to be happening there. But you can find me on Twitter, Blue Sky, sometimes Instagram, TikTok, but just Moonvald. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And it's very exciting to be able to sit down and talk with more fellow lore masters in the community on a regular basis. So thank you so much for agreeing to come along and have this chat. Because seriously, it's fantastic to get another perspective, but also a perspective of someone who will be able to talk with some confidence about all of the topics at the core of this. If ever something like this comes back into the story, we should absolutely do another of these.
Oh yeah, I would love to. Again, I feel like I've been super rambly, and I would like to
But this is the joy of that, right? Like, we get to explore a bunch of different topics. You know, we joked about this and sitting there and being like, podcast format, but like, legitimately, at some point down the line, there's probably another few of these in the truck somewhere we could probably figure out. It's just a case of like, when is the right time and what are some good elements that need exploration and whatnot. It's just really great. But Moon, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very grateful for you having brought me on. I really appreciate it.
And in the meantime, if you want more content over here, remember everyone, you can go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe. Do all the algorithm things as per usual. Go ahead and hit the like button and leave your own thoughts and comments down below. In particular, I'd love to sit there and hear you all expanding on the topics that we talked about, but also bringing some other things in there, because Destiny is a universe filled with tangible mysteries. So go ahead and let us know if there's something that you think we might have missed that is worth expanding on in the realms of esotericism and occultism and the way that Destiny's worlds draw inspiration from those topics. Let's go ahead and give some interesting context and knowledge to it all. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching and listening, and as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that my name is Bife, Rodacia Arastra. I'll see you Starside.